Good afternoon, and welcome to today's roundtable discussion. My name is Faye Akindis, and I work at UW Systems Office of Professional and Instructional Development. Today's roundtable grew out of OPID's Anti-Racism Committee, chaired by Jordan Landry of UW-Oshkosh. It took shape by connecting a few developments: citizen uprising against police brutality, a growing movement toward anti-racist teaching, and the UW Regent's recognition of Professor Selika Ducksworth-Lawton of UW-Eau Claire with the annual Diversity Award. The award uplifts the importance of engaged faculty work in the UW system and resonates with the Wisconsin, which extends the classroom into our communities. There are many things to talk about regarding race, institutional racism, and education, but today we will focus on the Jacob Blake shooting as a political turning in Wisconsin. It was captured on cell phone and quickly spread through social media before being covered by mainstream corporate and independent media. The shooting of Jacob Blake by police officer Rustin Sheskey thrust Kenosha into the international news. The shooting happened on Sunday, August 23rd, minutes after 5 p.m., nearly 3 hours before sunset. It happened 3 months after George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis. 2 days after Jacob Blake was shot 7 times, 17-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse from Antioch, Illinois, killed 2 protesters and injured a medic on Sheridan Road, escalating the already heated tensions in Kenosha. The focus of today's conversation is faculty activism. What is our responsibility as educators to acknowledge systemic racism and injustice, to address what it means for our students, and to seek changes for the future? Now I'd like to introduce our 3 guests. Our first guest is Selika Ducksworth-Lawton, Professor of History at UW-Eau Claire. She is a specialist in 20th century African American military, national security, and civil rights history. She is an active community member, serving as executive board member of the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, chapter in Chippewa Valley, and serves on the Eau Claire Police and Fire Commission. Selika hosts a weekly radio show and podcast called Conversations of Color, and is writing a book, Honorable Men, Armed Self-Defense, and the Deacons for Defense and Justice. Welcome, Selika. Our second guest is Gladys Mitchell-Walthour, Associate Professor of Public Policy and Political Economy in the Department of African and African Diaspora Studies at UW-Milwaukee. Gladys is author of the book, The Politics of Blackness, Racial Identity and Political Behavior in Contemporary Brazil. She is co-coordinator of the U.S. Network for Democracy in Brazil and was a Lehman Visiting Scholar at Harvard University in 2014. She was awarded a 2020 Fulbright to Brazil, which, because of COVID, has been postponed to 2022. Gladys is also co-leader of the Scholar Strategy Network, Madison and Milwaukee chapter. Welcome, Gladys. And our third participant is Jonathan Shailor, Professor of Communication and Director of the Conflict Analysis and Resolution Certificate Program at UW-Parkside in Kenosha, where he has taught for 26 years. He has been a volunteer educator at the Racine Correctional Institution since 1994. This semester, Jonathan is on sabbatical, writing a book about the Shakespeare Prison Project, which he established in 2004. So welcome, Jonathan. Thank you for leaving your writing sabbatical, and joining us today. All of our speakers are tenured professors with round lives. They teach, write books and articles, participate in conferences and seminars, perform service for their universities, communities, and disciplines. They are all also parents. Before we begin our discussion, I'm wondering, what should we know about you that wasn't in my introduction? And we'll just go alphabetically, beginning with Selika. So what should we know about you that wasn't in my introduction?
I'm a musician, and to be a musician in Eau Claire is a little bit different. I am the daughter of 2 teachers, and my mother wound up as the chair of music, theater, and art at Southern University in New Orleans. So while I did get all 3 of my degrees from predominantly white institutions, all the rest of my family went to Southern University. I feel very connected to my Louisiana roots, and I basically grew up on the SUNO campus. So I'm very much a Louisiana Creole with all of the crankiness that comes with it.
Okay, thank you. Gladys?
Great. So something I guess that wasn't mentioned is that I have been homeschooling my daughter for 3 years. I guess I should say we, me, and my husband, but but I have been homeschooling her for 3 years, and then also we meet regularly. So we have a group called Quilombo, Freedom Quilombo. And so it's a group of 2 other Black moms, and we just do lots of learning together in addition to, me homeschooling my daughter. So she has the opportunity to play with other children, but also to have a very Black and African centered learning. So I think that's something, that's obviously not in my CV, but that takes up a lot of my time.
That's great. Thank you. Jonathan?
We have a 12-year-old son named Isaac, and as a family, we do a lot of running together. We run half marathons and marathons, raise money for cancer research and other causes. I wanted to note in relation to today's topic that I thought it was important to share the movie The Hate You Give with my son when he was 10 years old. That was a couple of years ago. We watched it together. We cried and got angry together. And I'm so glad that he had that running start to what then happened in Kenosha just 2 years later. It was a foundation for the talks we had then.
Okay, thank you. I will pose a few questions to you, at times reframing and asking follow-up questions before we engage in discussion, and then open things up with the audience for a Q&A discussion. My first question, what did the Jacob Blake shooting mean to you as an everyday citizen? Selika?
I think that where we are here in Eau Claire, many of us identified with Jacob Blake, and the way people reacted to the video and the fact that some people couldn't see what we saw. What I saw, what my Black students saw, what some of my white students saw, there were other people who were swearing up and down that they saw him with a weapon, they saw this, that, and the other, and we're looking at the same video. So Jacob Blake, for me, really highlighted the danger of people imposing their stereotypes on especially young Black men. I'm the mother of a 21-year-old who is going to school at Platteville. And I have to live in fear because he's a 6'3" Black man, even though he's the sweetest person on face of the earth, that people won't even literally be able to see him. So for us here in a very hyper white space, the nature of being unseen creates even more danger. And I think they brought home for the sitting in.
Okay, thank you. So there are different ways to decode the video. Even if we're all watching the same thing, the interpretations were different based on positionality, identity, experiences.
Well,
Gladys?
white people, they did not want to, I guess they imposed a weapon there that we did not see.
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay. All right. Gladys?
Yeah, so when I heard about the case, it really reminded me of two things. One is more about kind of space and place, and especially in a place like Wisconsin. So one is about, where Black people can be, where they cannot be, what they can do, what they cannot do. And I see this over and over, beyond just police violence, but just violence against Black people. And then the second thing, which is, related to the first, is really about violence inflicted on Black people, right? So his case was one where he made it out alive, but of course, now he is disabled. And I think about all the ways in which Black people suffer violence in a number of spaces. It could be at work, it could be in the grocery store, it could be, anywhere in a public space. And that leads to some type of injury, which we may not be able to see physically, but it's harmful. All of the various ways that Black people are treated is harmful. So that's really what it reminded me of. My brain went straight to that of, oh, this is another case, again, especially in Wisconsin, of violence being enacted on Black people. And I think the extreme cases are the ones of police brutality. In everyday life, this violence is carried out against Black people every single day. And so this is just one where it's highlighted. I should also add the third thing that I thought about was his family and his children. So I thought, what are they thinking? How are they processing what happened to their father or to their family member and things like that? So those were my thoughts.
Okay. Thank you, Gladys. Jonathan?
Yeah, that part, Gladys, about his children really gets to me, and kind of can't stop thinking about that. What kind of support are they getting? What are they going through right now? Just devastating. So from my experience, of course, I live in Kenosha, and both the shooting of Jacob Blake and the protests occurred very close to where I live. The protests within 2 miles. And the video of the shooting of Jacob Blake was just stunning in its clarity for me. And I think it's very interesting that all of the attention goes to Jacob Blake and what he may or may not have been holding and what he may or may not have been intending and what he may or may not have been doing, and not on the actions of the officer and the officer's choices. I am sick and tired of seeing police officers lead with their guns as if that was the approach to take. First gun out, then we see what happens. And if the gun comes out first, what happens next, is very tightly delimited. So that's been part of my experience. I was out there protesting, and I had my first taste of the ACLU action, Selika, with Nat Godley, and he got me set up, and I was out there in the vest and monitoring the police activity. So there's a lot to talk about, but that's my opener.
If I can put in here, Kenosha is the first time in the last 10 years that we have had ACLU and Legal Guild legal actually targeted. 2 were hit. One was hit with a car, luckily minor injuries. The other one was hit with a bike. And so Kenosha was a number of firsts. Kenosha was also the first time ACLU participated in a joint command with other groups. So in order to keep legal observers safe and to try to keep activists safe. So it was a learning experience for us who do ACLU work.
Okay. So the Jacob Lake shooting impacted all of your lives at a personal level. And it happened just before fall 2020 semester was about to start. How did the incident and your experiences as an activist inform your teaching in fall 2020? And you might want to focus on one specific course or example, and then we can take it from there. Okay. Selika?
I had always done primary source, my students doing primary source research in my African American history class, but I shifted the document reads that we do where they read and assess and analyze primary source material, so that they would be spending more time with the Black codes, the Jim Crow codes from the old states of the Confederacy were intact until 1965 and still enforced until the 1990s. I moved an assignment so that they could spend more time into riots and resistance, especially with the 1866 murders in New Orleans and moving through the Elaine riots, etc. And I used a number of resources from the Equal Justice Institute on lynching to connect the past to the present so that they could see that the legal lynchings of today, these summary executions that we're seeing, are linked through the Black codes, and the attitudes that defend the legal lynchings are also linked to the Black codes, and especially to allow them to see this in the Ahmaud Arbery case that also happened, last year, but with George Floyd, and to see why there were white people going back to these older ideas. So I did actually a lot of work to push my history class to really connect to what they were seeing.
Okay. Thank you. Gladys?
Yeah, so in the fall, I taught an intro to African American history class. So similar to Selika, I was doing a lot of connecting history with, what was going on or what is going on. But again, since this is a virtual environment, and also this was still during the elections, which were highly contested, especially, here is a swing state. So I had actually started my class, making videos and things like this, but I actually didn't feel very comfortable, because I felt like it would be too easy for students to take a snippet of what I said and post it on an alt-right website. And in the past, I've done lectures where the flyer for the lecture was posted on an alt-right website before we even had the panel. So I always have to keep that in mind in all of my classes when we're face to face. I do not allow cell phones. I don't allow laptops. My students can only use a notebook and a pen or a pencil. So I just also want to mention, so that we remember the climate that we were in and continue to be in. So that's kind of the climate that I'm in when I'm teaching these highly sensitive topics. So of course I still taught my class. I still did all the things that, you know, Selika just mentioned. Anytime there's something on NPR, like a media clip that I could post for my students and then link that to our lesson, I did that. But I was very, you know, I was very hesitant to post, you know, videos of me actually talking about extremely sensitive topics, just due to the climate that we're in and experience that I have had, and other scholars I've heard about their experiences.
Yeah. You point out an important point about the vulnerability we experience as educators in certain situations, and how we have to be very cautious and mindful of the possible implications of addressing certain things, certain ideas, especially based on where we live, where we are. Jonathan? Yeah.
So this was in a way serendipitous in a horrible way, because I have a course, practicum for the conflict students, called Practicum in Conflict Analysis and Resolution. And what they usually end up doing is organizing conversations, storytelling, and explorations of conflict with a community group. We were thrown out of our original assignment because we worked in a homeless shelter, and we had no access to Halo in Racine due to COVID. So I was searching frantically for somewhere for us to work. And right up to the last minute, I had been looking at Braver Angels, which is about organizing conversations across the political divide. And I'm still interested in that as a potential future project. But then August 23rd happened, and the need for community conversations around Jacob Blake and everything after was so palpable that it just seemed like a no-brainer to steer the class in that direction. So what we did very quickly, so that we were able to start on September 16th with the community, was organize a series of conversations. The university was very helpful in, and this is all the way to the top levels of administration, in helping us solicit participants. The media was helpful. We used social media. And so we had 64 people at our first meeting on Zoom. There were a series of 5-6 meetings over the semester, and it was based on the study circles model, which now has a different name. It's escaping me, but it's beginning with the community stories and moving there to a clarification of issues, looking at a range of possible responses, and then creating action plans. We developed 6 working groups over the semester. These are my students working alongside community members. And in December, we shared our plans. And I can talk more about that later, but that was the overall structure of the course. And it was very intense. It was very exciting. It was very challenging. It was very messy. But that's how it panned out.
Do you plan to continue a class like that, formatted the way it was? Will you do this again in the future?
I have a lot still to think about, and it's unfortunate that my sabbatical came right up against the end of that semester. That was this spring, because I had already contracted to write this book on the Shakespeare project, which is a really different thing. So my attention and my energy has been so strongly on that, I haven't been able to give enough thought to where we would take it in a follow-up semester. And obviously the class will resume this fall. So I'm open to suggestions,
Okay.
but I'm thinking about it. Yeah.
I just have one more question, which is actually several questions in one. And if you could answer this, and then we can open it up for discussion. And so if anyone has said anything you'd like to comment on or pose a question, we can do that. I will begin the questions with a quote from Arundhati Roy. Quote, "The trouble is that once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you've seen it, keeping quiet, saying nothing, becomes as political an act as speaking out. There's no innocence. Either way, you're accountable." Close quote. So my questions are, is it possible not to be a faculty activist? What makes a faculty activist? And what compels some faculty to act and others not to act? And I guess a question tied into that is, what gives you courage to be a faculty activist?
So this ties back to Dr. Whitehead's discussion earlier when we were talking about be a spark for your students, but also how do you stay sane? And the commodification of our bodies as professors. And what does it mean for us to engage these predominantly white spaces? You know, so we get to do this research, we are expected to assimilate to a medieval system of learning, a medieval system of fiefdoms, where the people who are rewarded not for the Wisconsin idea of into the streets, but for the next article, the next book review, the next book. Yet the community often expects us to be the leaders, especially if we are a multicultural person in a hyper-white space. So we have conflicting expectations that, and the administration wants us to represent the university in a way that upholds a system that we study and know has bias brought in. It's the bias is built into it. So some faculty can avoid that. They're introverts. They want to live the life in minds, and they do not feel compelled to go out and help people because they can stay in their safe little bubbles. But I think I can't stay in my bubble. For one thing, you know, in a school with 450 faculty, only 10 of us are Black. An area with 75,000 people, less than 600 of our the year-round residents are Black. We're only 4% minority. Hmong is our largest minority. So sometimes we are called. We have no choice. We cannot sit back because we're going to be dragged into it. And I guess for me, if not me, who? That's the question that I have to ask. I have a Black son, a Black daughter, a Black husband. I have Hmong friends who are family of the heart, as well as Latino and Indigenous. And I'm in an area where people died during the spearfishing issues. So if I can help research, and I really did apply my research this summer to the public to save people's lives. I feel like to do this. I don't feel that I have a choice anymore. And this is, it somewhat brings us back to Ida B. Wells and Du Bois in the 19th, where if you're the talented 10th, you have to lead. And now the talented 10th is multiracial, and we have good white allies, but we still are expected to break the barriers and to reach across race, no matter what the cost is to us personally. We bear the burden of the double consciousness.
Mhm. Okay. Thank you, Selika. And by bringing up this morning's plenary with Dr. Karsanya Whitehead, it reminded me of what she said during the conversation period. She said, there comes a time when you need to decide, who do you want to be in this space? And she teaches at Loyola University in Maryland, which is a predominantly white institution, similar to many of the universities in Wisconsin. And it was the Trayvon Martin killing that was a turning point for her. And she had to make a decision, or she decided and said, I can't stay in the archives writing historical scholarship based on archival materials. I can't stay in the archives if my sons aren't safe. And so she became a public intellectual writing for the public as opposed for a small, narrow audience. Gladys, would you like to comment on the Arundhati Roy quote and all of the questions regarding being a faculty activist?
Yeah, so in terms of the act to be, courageous or to have courage, I feel compelled, right, when I see or witness an injustice in any kind of way. I feel compelled to say something about it or to do something about it. And so I think that has really compelled me. In so most of my work is on Brazil, but now I have a new project where I'm doing this comparative project. But so for in both cases, as you mentioned in my intro, I'm the co-coordinator of the U.S. Network for Democracy in Brazil, which is a group that's that is always in solidarity with social movements in Brazil, and doing a lot of work against repression there. But in terms of the U.S. and Wisconsin, I wanted to read from this statement that I first thought about right after the Jacob Blake case. And again, it's because it reminded me of all those things I talked about before about how Black people are seen here. And so what I did is I came up with this statement, but then had colleagues throughout the UW system to sign on to it and also to put in their own comments. So I'm just going to read a little bit from that statement. And this was published in the Cap Times in Madison, which is a a virtual platform. So I'm not going to read the whole thing. Despite our challenges, the state of Wisconsin's education system can play a role in addressing racist behavior and racial inequality in the state. However, Black faculty, administrators, and students are woefully represented across the state, often allowed to cycle through campuses. If Wisconsin is to move forward, this trend must stop. Part of addressing the racial inequality in higher education is attracting Black scholars to Wisconsin campuses and supporting them through their careers. As professors, we teach Black history with the hope that the new generation will not look to weaponize Black skin and further perpetuate stereotypes of Black people as dangerous criminals. Therefore, we call on institutions of higher education across Wisconsin to disrupt anti-Black racism and white supremacy by increasing resources to hire, support, and retain Black faculty and senior administrators. We also call for schools across the state to step up recruitment and support of Black graduate and undergraduate students, increase visibility of Black people in Wisconsin universities, along with a greater emphasis on helping Black studies programs grow, are effective means of reducing the racial bias, which one day may show how Black lives matter. This is one of many paths forward toward a more equitable society. So we had 12 people to sign on, and we have professors from UW-Milwaukee, Madison, Oshkosh, I believe also Platteville. But as it relates to your question, having a group of other professors, not only in my department or at my university, but throughout the UW system, really allowed me to see that, it's not just me, it's not just my department, and I am in an African and African diaspora studies department, so one that's already committed to these things. But it was great to see throughout this system that there are other scholars, committed to racial justice and fighting all types of inequalities. So that's, in short, how I would answer the question is, I'm always committed to these type of things, but also I know that there are others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So organizing and finding a collective of like minds is very important. You can't go it alone, right? And as Selika mentioned earlier, if you're in a fairly isolated space and you're one of, 5 Black faculty, it's difficult to do, but you can network throughout the system and find solidarity and strength from others. Jonathan, what are your thoughts?
Sorry, just thinking. I'll invoke a white male, Teddy Roosevelt, who said, "Do what you can with what you have where you are." And I feel like that has been my story largely. To take my white male privilege and now the privilege of being a full professor and to leverage that and to use that in solidarity with people of color, with other people who face injustice, and do something to meet the moment. So I was just thinking, I've been doing this a long time. When the Iraq War broke out, I organized a full day conference at UW-Parkside involving people from across the campus, every department, I think, well, maybe except the hard sciences was represented. And also, when we were able to do this, I used the university email before it was so carefully controlled, and got over 200 signatures right away, protesting the war that was then published in the Kenosha News. Interesting how times change. I guess that's what I would say, though, is leveraging my privilege and continuing to speak out with an awareness of my position as a white male and as somebody who's trying to build bridges. So 2 quick examples, maybe a success and a failure, but an instructive failure. So the failure was when I joined the march from the site of Jacob Blake's shooting to the courthouse, and I was documenting. I was recording, and I was moving through the crowd with great ease and quickly, darting around. And I got right up to and realized that I was right alongside Jacob Blake's family, and I had my camera up on them. And one of the members of the family used the strongest possible body language to move me out of there. And I mean, direct eye contact, not physical contact, but moving me out of there with the pressure of his presence. And he did not break eye contact with me until I looked away. And I think that's instructive historically. If you know anything about nonverbal interactions between whites and blacks, there's a lot that's been said and studied about eye contact and power, and why Black children, for example, sometimes are criticized or have been criticized for not making direct eye contact with their teachers. And it's a power thing. So I learned something from that experience, and I share that experience. The on the flip side, or something more positive, I guess, is one of the participants in our sessions during the fall called out a city alderman who had been posting on Facebook some very hostile things, like calling Kamala Harris a hoe, and other racist and divisive things. And I contacted that alderman and had a 2-hour session with him where I walked him through his Facebook posts and instructed to him as to why people were so upset. And I was in a position to do that somehow. So I used it. Anyway, that's all.
Okay. In the next few minutes, I invite the audience to pose your questions in the live Q&A post or in the discussion forum. And I also invite our panelists to comment on each other. Did you hear anything, or would you like to pose a question or extend something that you heard one of your colleagues say?
I think that what we forget, that a lot of the civil rights movement was led by college professors. That Rosa Parks was a professor of home economics at Alabama State University, and every first Montgomery bus boycott was. That in Louisiana, Daryl Daniels, several of the foremen have linked their activism to the algebra project. So we've seen teachers and professors as the leaders, but I am amazed that John do what he did, because up here, as a Black woman, I get my question, unless, to be honest, I'm going to let me Paul in the slang, unless I cut some heads and make it clear that I know exactly what I'm talking about. And over the last 30 years, I've had to cut a lot of heads to get to a place where most people will be you know, so to be able to use your white privilege to do that, I think is very good, because a lot of who are brown in hyper white spaces, and this also goes back to, you know, are gaslighted. We are told we're being unreasonable. We're told we're being paranoid. We're told we're not seeing what we're seeing. And we get mobbed up and bullied by others in academia who want to force us to a model that makes them comfortable. I'm wondering if you two have seen, because I have definitely seen that when I am the only in the room, I get a lot more until things blow up and they want me to fix it. I mean, is that
I would disagree with
your
you. I get it from students. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I was just saying I agree with you. Even from students, you know, I get tested on, you know, if I'm deserving to teach them, or if I have the qualifications, or even if I just, you know, I don't know, if I'm out in a public space or gathering, and white people really doubt if people are just talking about what they do, and I say I'm a professor, people really like they don't believe me. So, and that's just everyday people. So I agree, it can be challenging, and you have to do a lot. And again, it's in all spaces. I would like to be able to go to the doctor and not have to announce that I'm a professor just so that I can get respect. Um, I should not have to rattle off my resume so that I'm treated like a human being, right? And I also think about other people who don't have the privilege of being able to say, oh yeah, I teach at UW-M, or I am a professor, or whatever it is, just to get the minimum level of respect. And again, I'm talking about everyday things, so not even getting to the level of organizing or doing what Jonathan said. Yeah, so I'm just agreeing. I've had those experiences as well, Selika.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I have a question for Gladys, and this would apply to all of you as well. But in her book, The Politics of Blackness, in her acknowledgments, she thanks a former professor, John French, who taught a class on Afro-Brazilian history and culture. And she was a second-year undergraduate student at the time. And his teaching opened her eyes to the culture and lives of Afro-Brazilians, which is her sustained scholarship over time, right? This is her career. And since this is a teaching and learning conference, I'm wondering, how did he present the material and how did he teach to make it transformative for you? And then I'm wondering if Jonathan and Selika had similar experiences that led to their lifelong careers in their particular areas of expertise. Gladys?
That's a great question. Again, I was an undergrad, and John French is, he's still a professor at Duke. He's a historian. And I really enjoyed the various ways that he presented the material. And also, even though it was a fairly large lecture, he made sure that he was engaging the students. So I remember us watching films. I remember us keeping a journal where we were writing about our thoughts when we were presented with, different materials, whether it was a movie or a book we read or a class discussion. So I think that's what, besides the topic where, when I was introduced, to Afro-Brazilian culture, I was just, so fascinated, and also making my own connections and comparisons to the status of Black Americans in the US, and then the status of Afro descendants in Brazil. So, and then the other thing that I can say about John in particular is that he's someone who, it's just a great mentor. So even though in undergrad, again, it was a large lecture, when I finally told him, I guess maybe 8 years later, I was, I wrote an email and I was like, oh yeah, John, you know what? That class changed my life. And after that, he sent me, so he was sending me articles. He invited me to conferences. That led to me meeting other people doing work on Brazil, who I'm still very close with today. And I can still, email him. And so he's just been a great mentor. And I think that, it really did have a huge impact on my career, but also I was able to see how someone mentors students, right? So even when you are in a large classroom, somebody might reach out to you, years later, but he was still available to send me resources, and like I said, to invite me to conferences and talks and things like that.
Great, thank you. Selika, and then Jonathan.
I had a little different experience. I did go to Ohio State. I got all 3 degrees from Ohio State, which is very unusual. But I was an honor student, all of that stuff. And my positive experience was with Warren Van Tyne, who is a labor historian, who was the chair of my PhD committee, because he also at that handled almost all of the African American students. And we had the largest number, I am so much older than y'all. We had the largest number of Black graduate students in history in the United States then. We had 50 graduate students at Ohio State in 1993. So, and he was the one who in my undergraduate had introduced me to history. I had gifts that needed to be used. But so Warren is still, I mean, I had him at my wedding. You know, I'm godmother to his children. He has helped me, but he hasn't been able to help me in military history because he's a labor historian. The two military historians I had, I'm the first woman to come out of my program. So while Williams and Alan Millett, and I should say also Gil Martin, they didn't know what to do with me. So I had to turn to other graduate students in African American military history in the US to help with my career. Robert Jefferson, who is now at University of New Mexico, he was a graduate student at Michigan when I was at Ohio State. We worked together with each other, Isaac Hampton. So I had to forge my own networks and learn how to make a space for me. I will say that 3 years ago, I went to Society of Military History. There was only 2 Black people there in Ohio, Columbus, Ohio, out of 3,000 conferees. And I saw Williamson Murray, who had directed my master's thesis in Indianizing the Indian Army. And that idea of caste and race is coming back, and I'm doing some new work with it. And he told me he was very proud of me. But I really have to say it was other graduate students and other people in the field who gave me transformative experiences. It wasn't my faculty.
Okay. Thank you. Jonathan?
You know, it's funny, but my exposure to literature and film, even from the age of high school, reading Black Boy by Richard Wright. And by the way, I'm so excited that his new book has been released, the book that has never been seen before, The Man Who Lived Underground, which he called his most inspired work. So excited to read that. But in college, just happened to receive a book, because I guess the instructor felt it was obligatory to have, some kind of exposure to quote unquote cultural issues. So I read Jonathan Kozol's Death at an Early Age about segregation in the Boston school system and the devastating effects of that. Really made an impact on me. My graduate school advisor, Barnett Pierce, tremendous influence in terms of helping me see myself as a social change agent. And Barnett Pierce is a name that you will find if you start Googling Pearce. I won't say much more about him except that he's a great visionary thinker. He passed recently. And finally, and not certainly in last in order of importance, Augusto Boal, of the great theater activist from Brazil and the innovator of the Theater of the Oppressed. My own work, which I call the Theater of Empowerment, is directly inspired by his work, and had the opportunity to work with him directly on multiple occasions. So these are the people who inspired me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, we are 5 minutes to the end of this session, and so I would like to give each of you a few minutes to briefly share closing comments. It could be you could underscore an idea that you shared earlier, or extend it, or pose a question. Final thoughts to our discussion on faculty activism in Wisconsin. Who would like to go first? I guess we'll start with Selika again. Selika?
Of American Indian movement in Wisconsin and throughout the spearfishing. And Rick told me, Selika, you study leadership and you study relationships. Build the relationships with the police, build the relationships with the community. Because when you'll be called, you will need those relationships and they'll know who you are.
Thank you. Gladys?
Yeah, so I would just, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. And I'm so grateful that I actually got to meet the other panelists, even though, you know, this is a virtual setting. So thank you for having this, you know, this session on activism. And then I guess for my final words is just, I just encourage everyone, you know, viewing this to continue to speak out. You know, of course, I know it's difficult, and the campus where I am, the city is 40% Black, but our student population is less than 10% Black. And then the retention of that, you know, of those students is not good. So most Black students end up dropping out. So, you know, and then of course, Black faculty are underrepresented. So even in, you know, such harsh conditions, I think we just have to continue to speak out against any type of injustice. And I think we have to encourage our students to do the same, knowing that they have our support. So yeah, those are just my final words. Continue to speak out, continue to advocate for change within the state, but also in our respective universities. And it has really been great for me to hear you all's stories about what you all have been doing in your respective communities. So yeah, so thank you again for the invitation.
You're welcome. Thank you, Gladys.
Uh,
John?
yeah, I guess my closing thought, think of Helen Keller saying, life is either a daring adventure or nothing. You know, either you're alive or you're not alive. And I love what Selika said about relationships. I think that's core. Build relationships. And at the heart of that is listening, especially for somebody like me, somebody in my position, is leaving space, creating space for people to hear one another. That is so foundational to so much of the work that I think we need to do. Just listen and create spaces for listening. So I'll leave it there. Yeah.
Okay. Well, again, since this is a teaching and learning conference, I returned to my notes from this morning's plenary with Dr. Whitehead, and she shared a quote which I think is very inspirational for all of us. She said, our job is to spark the genius of our students, set them on fire, and let them loose into the world to radically transform it. So that was her motivational inspiration for all of us, and to find our spark and to move forward with that spark. And so on that note, thank you all very much for participating in this dialogue, this discussion. An hour goes by very quickly, and we had a quiet but very engaged audience. And I thank you all for attending as well. This was a recorded session, and so people who are not currently here may listen to us in the future. But thank you and Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.